Alright, so I called this lesson Surfer Style Text for lack of a better name because I actually saw this in a Surfer magazine. It was a very cool text effect that I saw not too long ago, and it really could be applied to almost anything, but it really is probably best suited for something like a surfing or wakeboarding or skiing or snow skiing or snowboarding or anything like that. Really got a kind of a cool, almost X Games type feel to it. So we're going to start with a simple text layer here, and I've gone ahead and set the text, as you can see right here. It's just the word awesome. And it is using the same Euro style font we used earlier on the Hollywood poster. It's just a nice big bold font. It looks pretty good. So what we're going to do is really kind of cut this image up, and I mean that quite literally. So we're going to have to rasterize the text in order to be able to do this. Now when I know I'm going to have to rasterize text, I like to go ahead and make a duplicate of that text layer. And I'm just going to press Command J to do that. And the reason why I like to do that is that if something happens and I mess up along the way of creating this effect, I don't want to have to go all the way back to the very beginning and create the text element all over again. All I have to do is just throw away whatever layers I have and then turn on this original layer, make another duplicate, and then I can go right into it without making all that new text all over again. So on the duplicate layer, I'm going to go ahead and give us a really kind of a bright green color fill here. Let's give it a kind of a really vibrant green there. And I'm going to go ahead and rasterize the text, as I mentioned earlier. I'm going to go ahead and right-click here in the blank area of the layer and choose in the menu here, Rasterize Type. So it's gone ahead and made it a rasterized graphic. It is no longer editable text. So go over here in the toolbar. I'm going to grab the lasso tool. Or, actually, let's go ahead and use the polygonal lasso tool. And we're going to create a selection to cut out a slice, if you will, of this text. I'm going to start over here on the side of the A, click once and drag over at an angle to the top area of the rest of the letters here. Click once, and then I'm going to come back and get to right about here and cut out a good sized sliver of this text. Now what I want to do is actually cut this and put it up on its own layer instead of just copying it to its own layer. So we'll do that by going into the layer menu and choosing New, Layer via Cut. So now it's cut out that section of that text. Looks pretty interesting. But here's what I want to do. I actually want to separate these two elements a little bit more. I've got them kind of butting next to each other, and it doesn't really look that interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and load that sliver we cut out as a selection. I'm just going to Command click or Control click right on that layer icon. Then go into the Select menu and go down here to Modify and choose Expand. And we're going to expand it only by 3 pixels, so we're going to click OK. Now, select the original text layer, not the original text layer, but the original layer containing the rest of the letters, and then go ahead and press Delete. So it gets rid of that excess area. When I turn this layer back on, we've got a little bit of a gap between those layers. Now, reselect this the little sliver we cut out, and I'm going to go and lock the transparency of that layer and give it a different color fill. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and press Shift Delete and use white. Normal mode, 100% opacity. There we go. So now that's already giving me a rather interesting look here. What I'm going to do is actually, with that element still selected, I'm just going to select my move tool and then just hit the left arrow several times to kind of give this an offset look to it. Just like that. Adds a little bit more interest to it. What I'm going to do now is reselect this layer containing the rest of the letters, and we're going to add a layer style to it. So I'm going to go ahead and into the effects menu here, go down here and add a stroke to the green area of the text. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a white stroke. Let's go ahead and make the stroke white. Size, I'm going to keep it relatively small at 2 and set the position to the inside. And there you can see it's giving me a rather interesting look. Looks a little bit more interesting than just plain old non-edge text. You know, it actually looks decent both ways, but I like the way the stroke looks on there. So that's looking pretty good. So the text element, for the most part, is done. Now what we want to do is kind of add a background element to this, because what really made this thing pop when I saw this in the magazine was not just the text itself, but the little kind of graphic background it was sitting on. So to do that, we're going to generate a selection of the overall elements we're looking at here, which is the sliver that we've cut out and the rest of the text. So here in the Layers panel, it's going to go ahead and Command click right on the layer to load the selection of one of them. And then also keeping the Command key or Control key if you're on Windows, and the Shift key. So I'm going to hold down Control, Shift or Command Shift if you're on Mac, and notice the cursor changes to a little plus sign on the next layer. We'll click on that sliver layer and it adds that layer to the active selection. So now I'm going to put a new layer underneath my active layer. Just hold down the Command key on the Mac, Control and Windows, click the new layer icon. There it is. And I'm going to go ahead and do this with 50% gray. So if I turn off the two text layers, there you can see our gray element. Looks pretty good. Now I'm going to add a layer style to this, because what I want to do is create a background graphic that conforms to the shape of the overall text, but is much bigger, kind of balloon it out. We're going to do that with a layer style. So here on this layer, I'm going to go ahead and choose stroke once again. And for the color, I'm just going to go ahead and sample the same gray. And we're going to bump up the size. Notice I've got it set to the outside. And we're going to bump up that size until all these circles on the inside, or any black area in the middle, especially right here in this O, pretty much disappears right about there. So it looks like it'll size it around 30. And we'll click OK. So now we've got that element sitting inside of that graphic. Looks pretty interesting. So now what we're going to do is mask a graphic element inside of this shape. I'm going to turn off these original text layers for the moment, so we're only concentrating on this layer containing the overall shape. Now I want to go ahead and rasterize this, because we're going to clip an image inside this overall shape. If I do it now, it's going to clip it in the original text, but not the stroke that we've applied, because it's a layer style. It's not actually part of the layer itself. It is just a layer style. So I want that layer style to be the whole layer. I want it to be the overall layer to just be one shape with no layer style. So to do that, we'll simply merge it down to a blank layer. So again, we'll put a blank layer underneath that layer, reselect this layer here, and simply press Command or Control E, merges it down, and now it is one huge graphic instead of a graphic element with a layer style on it. So I'm going to create a new layer above that one, and now we're going to add a gradient to this. Let's go over here and set our default black and white colors in the toolbar. And we're going to go and use the black to white gradient, or rather the foreground to background gradient, which is the first icon here in the gradient editor. And I'm just going to drag from the top at a slight angle from top to bottom. It's going to add that gradient. Let's actually do it as a linear gradient. There we go. Now I've gone from black to white, and it's on its own layer. We're going to create a halftone element here. So I'm just going to go to Filter, Pixelate, Color Halftone. Inside here, we're going to set the max radius to, let's try 15. And each channel I'm going to set to 0. And we'll click OK. So there is our halftone element. Rather cool. So back here on this graphic here, so I'm going to turn off that element there for the moment. I am going to go ahead and fill this with a color. Instead of the gray we've got here, let's go ahead and give it a blue color fill. So I'm going to go and lock the transparency. Let's go ahead and select a blue color here in the swatches panel. I'm going to press Option Delete and fill that color in. Now, this layer containing the halftone element, I'm going to go ahead and clip it inside of that background graphic by holding down the Option key. Remember how to clip a graphic. Hold down the Option, click in between the layers, clips it inside. We're going to blend this graphic element to that background by changing its blend mode to soft light. So now this image is clipped inside. I can actually move this around and do different things with it. What I am going to do is distort it. So I'm going to expand my document out here, press Command or Control T on that halftone layer, and then right click right on the object, and in the menu here we're going to choose Distort. And we're just going to distort this graphic that is clipped inside of this background element here to give it a little bit more interesting look than just the straight up and down elements there. If you wanted to get even really creative with it, you can, instead of choosing Distort, you can choose Warp and just really kind of crazily warp the graphic in a number of different directions. Anything you can do to add a little bit more interest to that. Well, I'm going to go and leave it like that. Let's go ahead and turn these layers back on. And now we're looking a little bit more interesting. So now, to separate these elements, or rather, to give a little bit more depth to it, these right here, I'm going to select the layer containing the text, which is this green element and the white little sliver there. and go ahead and put those in a smart object, because I want to add a layer style to this of a drop shadow. So it separates those elements. Notice the difference there, separating those elements from that background, ultimately giving it a very interesting look. Then what I'm going to do is go ahead and select all those layers, the smart object and the layers containing those background elements, and then contain those within a smart object. Now it's one graphic element. So now we're ready to go ahead and add it to an image. So if I have an image of a surfer here, and I've got a graphic element, because I did see this kind of like splash element that was kind of sitting in the background here, and it's just, this is actually similar to one of those files that we used earlier with the strokes, paint strokes. Same thing, got a file of different types of splats from iStock and simply added a layer style element to it. We've got a gradient going on here to give it some variation. Let's take our awesome text and go ahead and drag it over. And it is a smart object, so we don't have to worry about resampling or any of that jazz. We can go ahead and scale it down, fit within our element, angle it, do whatever we want with it. And even on this element, let's go ahead and minimize this, I can add a drop shadow to this. This is the beauty of layers and smart objects, is that you can have the freedom to go ahead and do this and get depth and editability through all levels of your images. So even within this image here, and with the text element in its final place, I can double click on that smart object to go in here all the way to the original elements, make any subtle changes I want to, close the document, save the changes, and we're updated and looking really good in our finished composition.